be allowing supplies and food to go through there. Why blame Israel? This is propaganda, and that in itself is racist.
Victor.
Well, the International Court of Justice, which is the principal judicial organ of the United Nations, expressly rejected the view that the apartheid or the barrier, the fence, whatever you want to call it, was solely built for security reasons. It annexes a large settlement blocks around Jerusalem into Israel. It also takes over a lot of water resources. And it's not just the wall itself, it's the matrix of control, a separate road system, permits placed on Palestinians who can't move from one village to another, or from Gaza to the West Bank, or study in the West Bank and live in Gaza. They also have permit systems that affects them traveling to Israel, traveling outside of the occupied territories. There are also discriminatory legislation affecting marriage rights between Palestinian spouses in Israel and in the occupied territories. And then there's the special legal regime for the settlements and the settlers. Israel uses military orders to channel Israeli legislation into the West Bank, which leads to two different regimes, legal regimes applying for Palestinian citizens and for Israeli citizens living in the occupied territories. So I think that there are parallels with apartheid South Africa, especially if you look at the occupied territories rather than Israel itself.
If I may say, Victor, that's another thing that we always seem to do wrong, another propaganda tool to call the West Bank an occupied territory. It's a disputed territory. When Israel won the war, when Israel was threatened with annihilation by several Arab states, whose actual role was and aim was the extermination of the Jewish state. That's what you call ethnic cleansing, by the way, Ken. The Arabs went into Israel in a number of wars with the sole objective to kill Jews and to rid the land of Jews. That's what you call ethnic cleansing. When you talk about the West Bank is the West Bank of Jordan. It was annexed to Jordan, and the Israelis took it from Jordan in a defensive war. They took Gaza from Egypt in a defensive war. They are now at peace with Jordan. They are now at peace with Egypt. So why call it occupied?
Well, why don't you actually look at the situation in 1948, when you had massive ethnic cleansing? Benny Morris, the historian, I know he's recanted this now because he realised he let out the bag, made it absolutely clear that the proto-Israeli state was determined to drive hundreds of thousands of Arabs off their land in order to create a Jewish majority in the areas they still have.
That's simply untrue. It's simply untrue.
Benny Morris hasn't recanted. He admits that there were hundreds of thousands of Palestinians expelled in 1948. He says it was a byproduct of the war, that there wasn't a plan. That's the difference between Morris and Ilan Pape. But he doesn't dispute
and no
the fact
mention
that
by either of you two guys, for example, the fact there are 1.5 million Arabs in Israel proper today. If that's ethnic cleansing, Ken, if that is ethnic cleansing, then what is? Then what is it? 1.5 million Arabs today. What did they come out of abracadabra?
In 1948, 85% of the Palestinian population were ethnically cleansed.
They were not ethnically cleansed.
The 15% that remained are the 1.5 million that exist today.
No, that's absolutely not true.
Benny Morris described, the man who went on to become Prime Minister of Israel.
A revisionist historian.
Yes, went on to describe how Yitzhak Rabin, in control of armed forces, forced all the population of Lod out of, the Arab population out. Didn't need to kill them, unlike some of the more extreme groups that eventually went on to form the base of the Likud party. But there was a clear policy of actually ensuring Arabs were moved out. And that is why, because still 60 years later, that ethnic cleansing has never been resolved. There still are the refugees everywhere.
Excuse me interrupting, Ken. Let's get it right. The Mandate of Palestine, okay, when the Jews accepted the petition, in the areas that were being petitioned, there was a Jewish majority, okay? Now, it was the Arabs who rejected it, not the Jews, the Arabs. If the Arabs would have accepted it, there would have been a two-state solution today. Notwithstanding the fact that Palestine, and the book actually that we're about to review calls Mandatory Palestine, covered, the British Mandate covered present-day Israel, including the Gaza Strip, the West Bank, and Jordan, and parts of southern Syria.
No, Jordan was cut off.
Jordan, no, I beg your pardon, when the Balfour Declaration was in 1917, in the Balfour Declaration, Palestine included Jordan, it included modern-day Israel and southern Syria. Okay, 80%. of Palestine was given up to create effectively a Palestinian state in which the majority of Palestinians...
What right did
of which
British
Jews are not
politicians-
allowed. That is ethnic cleansing.
What right did British politicians have to give away Arab lands to Jewish settlers?
It wasn't Arab
But
lands.
it's not just that, Ken.
Well, hang on. You're saying
the Balfour Declaration had safeguard clauses protecting the civil and religious rights of the Palestinian community. You talked about 1948 and the UN partition plan of 1947, but the war after the plan, after the partition plan was recommended by the UN General Assembly, it was never implemented. And when the UN decided to reverse its policy for a UN trusteeship agreement that would have kept Palestine's territorial integrity intact, Ben-Gurion then implemented Plan Dalit in April 1948, 2 months before Israel declared independence. So on the 15th of May, already half of the Arab population of Palestine had either fled or been expelled from their...
And what did the Arab
homes.
army say? They said, move out of the way and we'll...
No, that's not the case. That is propaganda.
That is not propaganda. What about the fact, you don't even mention the fact that the mayor of Haifa pleaded with the Arab population, please do not leave. And of course, as you know, Haifa is a perfect example of how Jews and Arabs live together in peace and harmony. In fact, you may know a few years ago, one of the restaurants that was unfortunately bombed by suicide bombers, okay, was actually owned by a Jew and an Arab.
Yeah, but let's not...
Where does ethnic cleansing come from?
Well, ethnic cleansing, we're in a position where the world intervened to stop ethnic cleansing in Yugoslavia, and the perpetrators of that ended up in prison. I mean, the reality is the perpetrators of the ethnic cleansing in the Middle East have got away with it, and the world has come to accept that.
Such as the Arab countries, who ethnically cleansed the Arab states of almost a million Jews.
This is part of the tragedy that once you start down this road,
that was assisted
Why don't you mention that?
The Jewish Agency assisted that. Operation Magic Carpet, funneling millions of pounds to help Yemeni Jews come to Israel. Same situation.
Exactly. So why weren't the Arab states, of which there are 20 or so, not helping?
Where you live.
And our homeland. And in fact, the Jews lost property, they lost businesses, they lost their rights when they were driven out of Arab states. Why don't you mention the ethnically cleansing? Why don't you mention ethnic cleansing in the Arab countries? Or should we just comfortably omit that from our language? Shall we?
Wherever there's been ethnic cleansing, it's wrong.
Why don't you ever mention it? I never hear you mention it, Ken.
Because I don't.
Always ethnically cleansing Israel.
Because
it
is the West that props up Israel. It is the West that gives arms to it,
and
we have a right to expect. We have a right to expect, therefore, that it actually deals with these long-standing problems that bring death to the streets of London when we get suicide bombers
here. Bring death to the streets of London
because of the long-term, double standard of the West. Victor, you're not getting as much time as you should in this.
No, I was going to return to 1948. But,
just go back to 1948 then.
1948. I mean, we've also got to remember that the Zionist movement, prior to the 1948 war, were also aiming to get rid of the British mandatory authorities.
As
the
the
Irgun and the Haganah and the Stern Gang also committed terrible acts of atrocities at King David Hotel, etc., against the Brits, assassinated Lord Moyne. But the point is that at the end of the day, I mean, we've got to come to a situation where the past has happened and we have to come to some kind of resolution. To live together.
So this really brings us to the point. Reading this book, I think it makes a powerful case that there are strong similarities with the apartheid. So we're not going to agree on that. But now we face the situation. Broadly, the world signed up to this idea of two-state solution. For me, as an Englishman, looking at the history of my country in Ireland, this is the tragedy. Britain imposed a two-state solution on Ireland in 1921. It didn't